Hello, welcome to this re-recording of a workshop that we gave earlier today on how to AI tools, guides, and conversation. This was a workshop for faculty at Colorado State University, and I'm Christina Quinn, the director of CSU Writes. We did a short reflection to ground ourselves as writers and how it is that we use or don't yet use AI. We talked about some select tools, and we talked about guidelines, university guidelines as they come out, and then your guidelines and agreements. And I talked about having the talk about AI, and in general, just had some really good conversation after that. So the reflection, one of the things that you want to think about are what are your current writing projects? How are you currently using AI for writing? And did you plan that? Did you plan out your current writing projects with using AI? How are your co-authors using AI? Do you know? Have you had those conversations? What do you see as the strength for the opportunities of writing with AI? Those will be some of your kind of interests. It's nice to know those. And what do you see as the limitations? Those are the places where you know that you're going to have some pushback, perhaps. And we'll talk about some folks with strong opinions in a moment. And then, how comfortable do you feel talking with your collaborators about use of AI in your collaborative, right, projects? So, and you can just think about, even if you're in a single author field, we had some folks in attendance who are how it is that you would be having those conversations in your departments. Are people talking about how they're using AI in their writing? Started off with getting informed. So it's helpful for us to think about what AI is and how we're using the terminology. And ultimately, AI is about engineered or kind of machine-based kind of work that can give a set of objectives and general outputs, such as predictions and recommendations or decisions influencing real or virtual environments, and that they're designed to operate with various levels of autonomy as decision makers, right? I'll be using the term AI really, really broadly here. We'll be including things that have been software programs and language assist programs that have not historically been considered AI. They're programs, they're software that we've used in the past. So just note that when AI came on the scene, big and bold with ChatGPT, that kind of changed, and a lot of things that we had been talking about as computer human interaction all of a sudden became AI. So just note that we'll be talking about AI broadly. I mentioned, skeptics, and I would count myself, by the way, as a skeptic in some ways. I think it's important for us as researchers and academics to be skeptical, right? That's how we learn and use things well. Nigel Kaplan, he works with English language learners, graduate students at University of Delaware, and he's been pretty vocal about his kind of resistances to using AI until, and he's just saying that as a text generator, we don't want to be giving over what it is that's human about us in our communication. He also brought up, things that we know about. There are issues of copyright infringement. There are potential invasions of privacy. There's bias in which, what counts as good writing and how are things structured. Environmental impacts of AI and de-skilling the teaching profession, which we didn't actually spend much time talking about, but you could think about plagiarism and misinformation, right? And so I think that it's important for us to take on some of the skepticism and just be careful as we're pursuing our interest in AI. It's also helpful for us to be curious. And there are studies now, human computer interaction, but here looking at, how it is that doctoral students are using AI is now becoming a place of its own study in writing studies, right? Just a reminder that software systems that we have used for language support are not new. We had many folks in attendance who used Grammarly. And if you use it as a tool, just know that it is building in new LLM capabilities. And depending on how you use it, if you have it downloaded onto your system versus you're using it through the web app, you might want to consider what it is that you're sharing with that system. And just confirm that your data and your work is safe, right? We've also started using tech for supported reading. I think it's fabulous. It's not terribly new, but there were calls before ChatGPT, right, for us to identify uh, technological supports for us to be able to wade through the sheer volume of relevant materials and literature that we might have to examine as experts in our field, because it's impossible to do all that reading now on our own. We talked about some common AI tools for writing and editing, and these are some things that you might want to consider. Go to the libraries first and foremost. If you haven't been there already to check out their AI guides, I highly recommend it. They're doing great work on helping us understand how do we generate prompts, what is AI literacy, how do we research with it, what are some of the tools, how do we teach with it, and then also how do we cite it. And so researching with it and how do we cite it are some of the things that I'm most interested in for our talk today. For our purposes, I listed out a little graph about some of the things that I have used. And we talked about like where it is that it might be best or most appropriate to use some of these softwares or excuse me, some of these AI and software programs. Zotero and EndNote, again, these are not terribly new. They've been long used in academe as reference management and citation generation, but you could use that throughout. It's helpful for you to think about what stage you're going to want to be using some of these tools. OpenAI ChatGPT, you maybe use it as a kind of brainstorming tool, or maybe late in editing. However, again, if you have original research, if you're using it for more than just a sentence or two, I would highly recommend not. It's an open access platform. It takes and people say, oh, it's free, right? But you're giving it your ideas, your words, your style, your structure. You're putting in original content. That's the price that you pay. Is it takes your original content. So just take care and how it is that you're using some of the open systems. Make sure that there's something that you can download or that you can use as a proprietary system. Just check the privacy uh, options on your systems that you're buying into. Just make sure that you know that you can use it for late proofreading stages and your content is not going to be at risk. And I would say that you could use Grammarly. If you are an English language learner, you may be using it early on as well to develop your English language skills. Elicit, this is for finding relevant research papers. I'll give an example of it now, but you would be using it early, right? For your discovery, for what's the literature out there? What are the gaps in the field? How can I contribute? Pulling together your literature review. Okay. So then you can find a lot more on the library's website. And I highly recommend just taking a look through and kind of see what seems like it would be most useful for you. The more you can understand and get informed about what the tools are, the better you can figure out like which tools do you want to be using, and you can be much more strategic with them. We didn't have enough time to cover many. That wasn't that kind of workshop. This is much more about us kind of getting aware and kind of getting some guidelines in place so that we can start working with these tools well. If we don't understand what it is that we're going to be using them for, and we don't have a good grounding in our guidelines, it makes it really tricky for us to use them and use them well and responsibly. I did give it a short example with Elicit here. This was for illustrative purposes only. And so you can use Elicit to pull together reviews. Note that there is a cost. That's always something that we need to be aware of when we're now using AI. And if you're thinking about grants and building AI use into your future research work, you might want to consider where's the budget for this? Where's the money going to come from to be able to subscribe to some of these programs? This was an example that I gave of a search on the free Elicit version, and the free source it searches and will identify up to 100 articles that they identify as relevant to your prompt. The prompt here was about a current project that I'm working on. What are the perceived sources and impacts of publication pressure among academic researchers engaged in collaborative manuscript writing? And it found 100 papers, and it included and screened 10 of those that seemed to be the most relevant. The reason it did that was because it's the free version and it won't do all of them. You have to buy in if you want to have a fuller and richer report. The report was helpful in many ways. It did find 10 sources. It gave me 10 sources, and 9 of them I had not come across before. They neither, however, were they really topically relevant, immediately relevant. I will have to dig through and I would have to read carefully to identify the places and the nuances where they might be relevant to one element of what we're talking about, but topically they were not quite relevant. So that was interesting. That was good for me to know in this source. I suspect if I paid for this, I would be able to get much better results. But I don't know. Guides and guidelines, things that you want to be thinking about as you put in place. What are your kind of bumpers in the bowling alley of you getting your manuscript put together, your research done and out the door? So what are your guardrails, for another metaphor, that kind of keep you kind of on the road and moving in the right direction? Some of the guides that we have here at CSU are student conduct related. That's where most information at universities is currently, and looking at how it is that students and assessment are, how can we make sure that students are not using AI in inappropriate ways, but appropriate ways, and how can we assess student learning, continue to assess student learning based on what it is that they submit, and know when it is that we need to submit or identify a student as having received unauthorized assistance on a project. And there are guides at the libraries, and we'll talk a little bit about that with citing AI and researching with AI again. Just to backtrack just a little bit to cover again the known risks. We know that those guidelines and creating guidelines for authors are a moving target. So I highly recommend that you check back in with the libraries, you check in on your guides, and you also be flexible in how it is that you are creating your own guides for working with on your own projects, but also working with others, because it is a growing and changing field. Deep seek and deep research, all of what's come out in just the past couple months apparently has just been game changing. So incorrect statements and incorrect punctuation, by the way, that is my fault, but that AI can produce incorrect statements, data, and references, that it might misrepresent information that is, if our academic and research writing is about accuracy and precision, we want to make sure that we're representing with accuracy and precision. And that text that we insert into the LLMs may not be private or confidential any longer. So that also means that there may be risks to your own copyright, that you might not yet have your work to release. So just consider some of these challenges. We did talk a little bit earlier with some librarians who were sharing about desk rejects and other things that may be related to OpenAI. So clear rules, just making sure that you are clear, reflecting. How are you wanting to use this? How are you using it? Don't blindly accept, whatever it is that the text suggestions are. That goes with Grammarly, any kind of software that you're using. It could be Microsoft Word, right? Old school now, but check your facts and references. What you have said and included is you're the authorial kind of subject and expert, and so you own that fact checking. Disclose any AI use, and I have a guide and model for you in a moment. Do not share original research, analysis, data, confidential information using it. Boris Streepy, he came and spoke at the Council of Graduate Schools a couple summers ago. And I really liked his approach, and particularly his slide, and here when he's talking, just lays it out very succinctly on one slide. It's dense, so take a screenshot or take a look at it. But basically what he laid out was how it is that for graduate students in particular, the opportunity to start using AI makes sense, because they're less likely to give over to the AI and treat the AI as the expert in the room. They're much more apt to think, be skeptical, right? And be able to start working through what it is that they're able to generate or getting out of LLMs. And so along with that, he says that co-writing with AI must always start with your own first thought, which is why you want to have experts who are using AI. He says it's tricky if you have learners who are not yet experts. How is it that they're assessing the quality of what they're receiving? So that was one kind of key points that I share with you. So how to cite AI tools. This is from Kristen Terrell. She gives us some really great guidance on if we are using AI as part of how we're gathering and doing our research itself, then we must be kind of transparent and cite it, and not just disclose that we've used it, but we actually cite it as part of our methodology because it's integral to how it is that we will be gathering and interpreting our results. If you're using AI in kind of more of a software capacity and it's giving you some word choice options and you are ultimately the person who's kind of taking that feedback, it's not unlike ultimately getting feedback from a colleague where you would give that colleague some acknowledgement, but not necessarily authorial credit. Although just remember, you can't cite AI as an author. But so these are guides that are also through the CSU Rights Library AI page. So just take a look. Terrell points out that you don't have to cite AI as a tool if you're just using it for kind of some sort of informal kind of finding some sources. But as soon as you start using it for kind of systemic kind of work and it's summarizing and it's doing some of the thinking for you, you need to cite it as the tool. If you're using it to assist with that data collection and analysis, any kind of analysis, that's where you're giving over to a tool, right? You're using that tool to be able to create something that you are then using as analysis, as creation of new knowledge, right? And contributing. So you want to cite it as a tool and how you've used it. But if you're just using it to generate some general editing or giving some feedback, you don't need to cite it. The ethical key, no matter if you're citing or not citing how you're using AI, is to disclose that you have used it. And I really like Carrie Weaver's artificial intelligence disclosure framework. And in that, and this is a dense slide, so please forgive me, and I'm not going to read through all of it, but I will kind of touch on some of the key elements in the statement of the framework and what you would disclose in a statement just acknowledging how you've used it. You could use it on how you've used it, if it was used in the conceptualization, the methodology, if in information collection, data collection, the execution, meaning the conduct of the research and the tasks, perhaps it's part of that process that you're using. Data curation, data analysis, privacy and security. How was your information and your data protected? Making sure that you're also aware going into using any softwares that it may or may not be protected. So just make sure that you're careful with that. Interpretation, if you're using it for interpretation, if you're using it to create visuals, writing reviews, we've talked about that, and editing, review and editing, and writing and translation. Translation, then that if you're feeding it text and you're getting a translation back, if you are not proficient in the language that you gave over to AI and you're reliant on that translation, if there's something faulty in that translation or something that another scholar might quibble with, you want to make sure that you acknowledge where you got that translation from. You do the same thing if you were working with a translation of a text and it was published and it would give you the names, right, and the dates of publication for that translation. So people can go back and they can identify where that translation came from. So project administration, wouldn't it be lovely if all of our email was just taken, those administrative tasks were picked up by AI or mind reels. So writing in 2025. Notice a teddy bear, he's got his eyes covered, but we have a lot to learn about and a lot to talk about with writing in AI and 2025. So getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is some of this conversation, I think, for your guidelines and agreements. Co-author agreements have been around for a long, long time, and they're necessary in order for credit to be given where credit is due. Some co-authors currently still, maybe longstanding relationships, have had great collaborations without using co-author agreements from the beginning. But my recommendation is if you're setting up a new research project or have a new collaboration, that you make sure that you are including a co-author agreement. As soon as you know that you're going to be writing a manuscript for publication, it's helpful to have folks just know that there's a fallback and that it's been articulated, that people will be given credit, right? It avoids awkwardness later on of those conversations. Let's say you feel like you've done more, but they, feel like they've done more, right? At some point, just having those conversations early is helpful. And you can even have, if you're working with a graduate student or a postdoc, have them go and look at what are the journal requirements for submission, and how are you going to be asked to break down all of the different tasks that have gone into the creation of that manuscript, those percentages. I like this model on strategies for collaborative writing that comes from an interdisciplinary team, mostly ecologists. And you can just look up in Ecosphere, you can find this PDF. It's accessible, it's open access. And what I like about the process that they describe is that they talked about what are their guiding principles as a group or a team before they started generating texts and doing much of the research together. So they know that transparency is important, open conversation, being inclusive and fair, protecting and promoting those who are junior or early career folks, making sure that there's some accountability where if folks aren't able to produce anymore, that they know that they have a way to step off, right, the team, and that other people can be brought on the team, but you have to be accountable for what it is that you're going to be producing. Efficiency and productivity as being some of those guiding principles that, of course, is a goal of a good collaboration, and being able to be creative in how it is that you bring things together and problem solve. And that moved into and that supported their best practices of how it is that they determined how people would get credit and participate in the team. They had a Google Doc, and this is an appendix that you can find also online. And we talked about it in terms of being clear for just listing out who's going to be involved, how they're going to be involved, manuscripts type. And then I love the prologue to this on what they're intending through this document in as a dialogue on authorship, and that allows for them to start having those conversations early. Note that this was before AI. They're not talking about AI specifically, but it's a really great model for being able to have conversations in even in asynchronous ways. If you are working on a large interdisciplinary international team, they did talk about writing as one of those ways, right? Of course, that credit is given, and AI can fit in these spaces. So you could add that in. Their guidelines on their kind of tracking of effort and who's contributing what are general kind of categories, and you can add in AI as one of those categories for sure. I took that model that they have and kind of loosely adjusted it, and then I worked with ChatGPT to put together a sample AI use agreement for co-authors. This would be a way for you to identify at the outset how it is that you want to use AI in your project, for what purpose, and then also to put in some qualifications for it. For example, you don't want to be using open ChatGPT AI for final drafts. That if you're using Grammarly, you want to make sure that a human is always doing the final review before you submit, so that there's your decision making or colleagues' decision making involved, not just Grammarly. So you can just take a look, and if you're interested in the sample AI use, just reach out and I'm happy to share that. Basically, what you want to put together is something that is revisable and dynamic and allows for your relationship to grow, your collaboration to grow, and your documents, your manuscripts, right, to grow. And so you want a guide that's not stifling, but you want something that's useful, and you want something that allows for you to disclose how it is that you've used AI. It would also be great to have a record, right? So somebody's the journal keeper, how it is that you're using these programs. Ultimately, because as a reminder, AI text generators cannot be listed as co-authors. They are not sentient beings. They aren't, you can't sue them. You can't have them show up at a conference and give a paper as an expert. So you are the expert, and these are the tools that you are going to be using. If you don't disclose, and if there are problems with your manuscript, retractions are difficult and messy and painful for all involved. And so I mentioned earlier an increase in, or a presumed increase. I don't know if this is true. I haven't seen data and proof on it, but the conversation was that we are hearing rumors about desk rejects becoming more common at journals. And it may be because journal editors realize that the risk of sending out a piece or accepting a piece that looks like it might have been, AI might have been used in it, but it's not been disclosed, it's not clear, just best to reject it, and rather than to have to retract it later on. Having the talk with your collaborators is really important, because let's say you are very clear on how it is that you are just and disclosing how it is that you're using AI, or that you're not using AI at all, and it's perhaps that they are. And so we had some conversation earlier about how do you address these tricky topics, right, with your co-authors. And I think as soon as you start talking about writing practices and processes, people get a little squirrely anyway. We are much more comfortable talking about the product, what it is that we're going to do in those task management kind of ways. But it's really important as well for us to disclose now and have an open conversation with our collaborators and co-authors about how it is that we may be using AI to generate text or ideas for our manuscripts and proposals. That open conversation requires that we develop some level of comfort with disclosure itself. I suspect that as time goes forward, we will just automatically bring that in, and we won't blink, right? Nobody will think that, oh yeah, you're using it. What is it? How are you using? What are you going to use? And why are we going to be using that particular tool, right? For what purpose? It'll be much more clear. And then what that does is it allows for you to create a space for disclosure for any use of AI in your research. And again, it's a moving target. There's continual kind of new forms and modes of AI coming out that we could use in our research. So the world is our oyster as long as we are ethical and disclosing. How's that? So if you have any questions or you want to talk about AI in your research writing, please reach out. Christina Quinn at colostate.edu, or at CSU Writes at colostate.edu. Thanks so much for watching the webinar, and I look forward to seeing you at future events. And may your writing be brief, frequent, low stress, and highly rewarding and ethical.